Curtis A reached out to me, said make a theme song for my show. Said alright, just give me all the details, man. And my homie says he don't know. Well, if you're gonna pay me big bucks, cause I might should have something to say. He said, you know what I bring, I'm the customizing king, nothing else matters anyway. So is he gonna have guests? I don't know. Is he gonna go live? I don't know. What time will it be? What will you see? I'm pretty much in the dark, but I can guarantee he'll be customizing action figures, getting paint all on his fingers. It's art by Akerman. It's art by Akerman. Tips and tricks and conversation, sharing his gift with every nation. It's art by Akerman. Art by Akerman. You best get ready, cause now it's time for Art by Akerman.
Okay, we're back. So at this point, I'm going to simulate doing some orc eyes on this cardstock, but with actual paints. So what I'm going to do first, I'm going to use one of these brushes. This is a number 10 Testers. It's just a fatter brush. We're working on a bigger surface here. As far as colors, I've got a So Flat Olive, Cadmium Primrose, and Black, which I've put on my paint palette here. I'm using the bigger brush to kind of simulate what I would be doing on an actual sculpt. So, so I'm just kind of going to color this in. Once again, I'm doing this on cardstock, so we'll see how well this works. But I'm kind of doing what I would do on an actual sculpt. So I would be kind of painting along these lines. I would try not to go too far into the like the eye itself, but I also want to get all of the skin color the way that I need it to be. So this is not meant to be pretty. I'm just kind of going through the motions to simulate kind of what this would look like. Okay. Okay, so imagine this is my orc skin tone that I've got. Obviously, I would go back and touch it up and make sure that, you know, I've got good coverage and all that kind of good stuff, which I'll just kind of do now, and then I'll be right back. Okay, so I've got that green down. Now it's time to work on the eyes. And this is the part where normally I would be working on the what we would call the off-white, but because we're doing orc eyes, we're going to do yellow instead. I am using a number 2 from Maple. I would probably be using more like either a 0 or maybe a like a 3/0, but because we're working on a bigger surface, I'm doing this. So instead of the whites of the eyes, we're doing yellow because it's orc. And we're just going to kind of fill in this area. Like I said before, if you go a little bit over into the eyelid, it's not the end of the world, but we want to make sure that we're covering that entire surface of the eyeball. We don't want to leave any eyeball left, you know, to the skin tone. We want to capture that eyeball for the eye, not for the skin. So we're, you know, if we go a little bit over, it's fine, but don't go under. Maximize that space. And I'm not normally used to painting on paper, you know, or cardstock, so bear with me here. This is a little bit different for me. And basically, I'm just filling that whole area in, okay? So I'm going to do that for both eyes, and then I will be right back. Okay, so now you can see I've done the yellow parts, and you can see it's, you know, it's kind of choppy around the eye, but the middle part of the eye is for the most part covered. Got maybe a few other areas where I would touch up a little bit, but we're going to go ahead and move on to the black part of the eye. And so this is the going around the edge. So this is kind of like the upper and lower eyelid. And we're just going to kind of do that outline there. Now, as we're doing this, if we mess up a little bit to the outside, that's not a big deal. Like if I went like this, it's not a big deal because I'm going to cover that up anyway. I'm going to touch that up afterwards. But we don't want to mess up to the inside. We've already got a clean spot on the inside. We don't want to mess that up. So I'm just going to continue to work around this eyelid. I'm going to do that on the top and bottom, and then we'll go from there. So, you know, if you can do long strokes, that's going to help you keep it smooth, at least to one side. Once again, if we go get a little bit choppy on the outside, that's not a big deal, but we want it looking smooth to the inside. And we could always touch up the inside again if we need to, but we really don't want to have to keep going over the same areas multiple times. So, and this is pretty thick here because we're using this, you know, these big eyes on this giant cardstock and stuff. Keep in mind on the figure, you're going to be using a much smaller brush, and this black line is going to be hardly noticeable. So, I'm going to do that on the other eye as well, and then we'll come back and look at touching those up and seeing, you know, kind of going from there. So I'll be right back. Okay, so now I've done that black part. I've intentionally kind of messed up in a certain spots to the outside, but we're going to touch that up. So I wanted to mess up intentionally just to kind of show you what we're talking about. At this point, what I want to make sure, because I'm getting ready to touch up the outsides on the skin tone and stuff, but I want to make sure that the inside is the way that I would want it to. And what I see on here is there's some spots like right here where there's not a lot of yellow. There's some spots over here where there's a little bit of black that is showing through, so, or green or whatever from when I did it before. So I want to touch up those spots to the inside first, because I want to work my way from the inside out. So I want to make sure the inside looks good, then the shadow of the eye, then the eyelid itself. So I'm going to go ahead and touch up these spots here. And on here, I'm trying not to mess anything up that I've done on the actual like outline of the eye. So trying to be real careful on there. Now, as you're, you know, keep in mind, I'm working on a flat surface with cardstock and just kind of a drawn on eyeball. As you're working on whether it's a 3D printed head sculpt or even let's say it's from an actual action figure line sculpt that you're working on, depending on how good the sculptor was, a lot of times you're going to have sculptural details in there that are going to help you catch the paint in the right areas. So it'll help you get like this, you know, what would normally be the whites of the eyes in that space that's sculpted without going over into the eyelid, because the sculptural details will allow your brush to stop where it needs to. It's a little bit more difficult here because I don't have any sculptural details. This is a flat surface. But you may also get, whether it's some 3D printed something or something from a, you know, maybe not as good of a toy company, where the sculptural details aren't there as much, and you know, you're not going to have that to help you. So you just got to kind of make do with what you got. So that looks pretty good. Obviously, you know, it's a flat surface, so I've got a lot of brush strokes and stuff. But I'm gonna finish letting this dry and touching up the inside, and then we'll start working on that outside. Okay, so we're back. We're now going to work on fixing up the outlines of this eye, make them not so thick, and clean them up a little bit. So I'm going back to my number 2 brush, probably be using like a 0 here, maybe even a 3/0 to touch up that outside. 5/0 if I really wanted to get super detailed with it, just depends. So the color that we used for the normal skin tone is this So Flat Olive, but for the upper eyelid and even just right underneath the lower eyelid, we want to darken that up a little bit. So we're going to add some black to that, and we're just going to kind of mix a little bit of black in and darken that up a bit, okay? And it's not going to take much black to darken that up. So that just darkened up that skin tone a little bit that we were using. So we had a little bit lighter skin tone on the rest of it, but for this part, we're going to use a little bit darker. And at this point, once again, we don't want to mess up to the inside, but we've got plenty of space to the outside to work with. So we're just going to kind of tighten up that black a little bit and make it thinner than it was before. Because you can only get it so thin with your paintbrush when you're applying it, but you can make it thinner by covering up part of that brush line with another color. So that's what we're doing here. So you get it to the point where, like, I probably, at least on the, action figure scale, couldn't paint that thin of a black line, but I can paint a black line and then paint another color on top of it to make that line thinner, which is what I'm doing here. Some of that black was a little wet still, so it's mixing in with the other color. But that's all right, we'll come back to that. And on this, I would just kind of keep this color going throughout the top of that eyelid up until I got to the brow that's overhead. So, and then we'll do the same thing over here. Once again, just kind of tightening this up a bit. And typically you're going to have like a nose bridge here. And you're not going to want to go onto the nose bridge because that part is raised and that's going to catch some light. But the stuff on the other sides of it are going to be more in the shadows. So just kind of be aware of the sculpt and what you have to work with. So I'm going to do the same thing for the under part of the eyelid. And we'll assume that there's like an eyebrow ridge up here. Let me just actually paint in an eyebrow just to make this a little bit easier. Let's say that there was some sculptural detail right here. Which is really helpful when it comes to the eyebrow if there is some sculptural detail, because it'll help catch the paint and make it look more like hair instead of just like a, mascara line or something. We'll just kind of fake an eyebrow in here so that we can paint up to that with the other color. And same thing on this side. Okay, so you can kind of see where I'm at this point. So I've touched up the upper and lower part of the eyelid. I've got a few spots here where it looks like I need to maybe kind of darken up that black again. And then I also need to smooth out this transition between the two colors. And so what we can do for that, let me work on this black part right here because I've got a certain spot I got to touch up. And then as far as the transition here, so we had the So Flat olive green that we mixed with black, and then we've got our regular So Flat green here. And in between those two colors is what we're looking for a transition here. So we're just going to take a little bit of that, a little bit of this, mix it together, and then kind of blend some of these areas so that those transitions aren't so harsh. So first thing I'm going to do is work on this line down here. So just kind of straightening out that line a little bit. And once again, if I go over a little bit to the outside, not the end of the world. If I go a little bit to the inside, then we've now got to cover up that black with a yellow, which is not as easy as covering up the black with a dark green. There we go. So we've got a little bit down too low here on the black, but that's all right. We'll touch that up with the dark green, and then we'll kind of work on some of this transition here. So a lot of this with working eyes. Now keep in mind, this is nothing, we've got no pupil, no iris, nothing like that. But even with this, there's still a lot of touch-up work to do to make sure that this stuff looks good. So this is why I would say, you know, start with some skeleton eyes, start with some orc eyes, get these lines down, get this touch-up work looking good. When you've got that and you can outline an eye and you can get the basic parts on there, that's when you can start working on pupils and irises and all that kind of good jazz. And then, you know, finally, like the highlights and the red part on the corner of the eye and things like that. Like that's all more kind of advanced. So start with this. And you could even do like glowing eyes or something, like if you had a fluorescent paint or something like that you wanted to use, you can use that. Just try to stay away from the pupils and irises at first until you get comfortable with all of this extra touch-up on the eyelids. Once you're good with the eyelids and the eye itself, then that other stuff isn't going to be as bad. So I'll let that dry a little bit and then touch up some of the underneath part where I got a little bit too far out. Right now I'm going to try to do this transition colors here. So I'm going to take some of that So Flat green, some of this darker one, and just mix those together a little bit and get something that's more in between those two. Okay, when I feel like I've got that color down, usually gonna just test it on my thumb, make sure it looks the right way, make sure that it's got the right consistency, and then I'm just kind of working on the transition between the two. And you could do this in a dry brush. You could do this, you know, just kind of a light layer, like where you're really thinning it out with water. And you're just kind of creating some of those different shades and depth and highlights and all that kind of good stuff there. But blending it together to where it doesn't look as harsh. So... So like this would be the nose. The bridge of your nose is going to be a little bit more bright highlighted. And then as you get down the sides, it's going to get a little bit darker. So we're just kind of trying to bring out some of that there. Okay. Then over here. Okay, so let's smooth that out a little bit. We'll probably do a little bit more. I'm going to touch up the bottom parts of these. So for that, I need to go back to my more the dark green. Kind of touch up some of these spots. Okay, that's pretty good. And then what I could do is this, so I mixed the So Flat olive with the darker olive, got this one in the middle. Now if I mix a little bit more of the regular olive with the medium kind of color that I just mixed. So basically I'm just mixing some of the original back into this other color. Now I get something that's in between the original and the secondary, and I can just kind of blend that a little bit more. So I'm blending the spot that I just blended, basically. And this is just all like as you're doing flesh tones, kind of stuff that you do. And it's not as bad on, let's say, an orc or something like that, as it is to like a human flesh tones. And most of that is because we don't look at orcs and skeletons and things like that on a daily basis. At least I hope you're not having to. But we look at humans all the time. And so if there's something off with a flesh tone or something like that on humans, you're going to notice it a lot quicker than you will on like an orc or skeleton or something. So just something to keep in mind. That's why it's a little bit easier to start with these and then work your way up from there. So that's pretty much kind of where we're at. There's definitely some areas that could be a little bit better. One of the things you gotta realize with this is that like you could keep touching this stuff up forever, but at some point you gotta kind of call it good enough and just be like, yeah, I think I'm pretty happy with where that's at. When I would be done with all of this on an actual like head sculpt, I would either use a heat gun or let it dry for a while. Once it was fully dry, then I would gloss the eyes. And what I do for glossy eyes is I use this technical Ard coat and put on there, and that is going to add that wetness, the shine to it, and kind of make it pop a little bit more. So I am going to, hold on, there's a spot here that is kind of annoying me. So let me touch this up. I'm going to let this dry. I'm going to put it to the side, and then I'll throw an Ard coat on this while I'm working on that and kind of show you that in a little bit. But for right now, this is kind of where we're at. And of course, I just stuck my thumb right in there. So let's go ahead and touch that up. That's one of the things with this stuff is you just gotta understand accidents are gonna happen. Nothing is forever. You can fix pretty much anything. Heck, even if you had to, you could start all the way over and you know, redo the whole thing if you had to. You clear it, you know, take off the paint and kind of go from there. But this isn't too bad. We'll get this fixed up pretty quick. So it looks like some of that's still a little wet because you can see kind of the black there. So I'm gonna let that dry for a little bit. I'll touch that up, add the ard coat on it, and we'll be right back. Okay, so I'm back. I've touched up some things. I'm going to go ahead and put a ard coat on here. So once again, this is Citadel ard coat. It's a gloss coat that you can put on things. Shake that up a little bit. And, you know, I've never done this on cardstock before, so we'll see how well this comes out. But we're basically just applying a layer of this on the eye itself. On a human eye, it would be, you know, the whites of the eyes, the pupil, the iris, all that kind of good stuff. Trying to keep it away from the eyelids itself. So this stuff works really well for lips and, you know, inside of mouths and things like that as well. It's going to normally, at least on plastic, it dries and gives it a really glossy kind of wet look, which is what we're going for here. So, and typically on this, just kind of whatever brush works for the size eye that you're dealing with. You're not worrying about details as long as you've let everything dry and you're not trying to apply this while it's still wet. You're not worried about, like, you don't have to do it separately on the iris and then on the pupil and things like that. Like, you can just cover the whole eye with this, and it's going to give you that look that you're going for. So we're just applying a layer to the whole thing. It's my first time ever applying this to cardstock, so we'll see how that goes. We're back. So here are the finished orc eyes. You can see the gloss does, I mean, it's not as much as on like a figure, but it does make it stand out a little bit, you know, look a little bit more wet. But yeah, this is basically it. You know, you're going over, you got your green skin tones, a little bit darker underneath the eyebrows, a little bit darker on the sides of the nose, and underneath the bottom eyelid. Your eyes are basically yellow with black outline, glossed up, and you're good to go. Okay, so that is part 2, painting orc eyes, and we will be back tomorrow with the human eyes. Till next time, keep creating, folks.